Hold on. There it is. We went live. Hey, welcome, Dr. Tartaglia. This is the second course we're doing on Mondays. It's a year one course in epistemology being done in the year one style, where we just take little essays from anthologies and get a survey of the field of the subject that we're going to discuss. This is epistemology, which I'm really happy that we're doing it together, you and I, because you and I have been debating some epistemological questions for about 8 years now. And it'll be really good to have you here to check me on my nonsense if I say things that you think I can't back up. So let's just do the intro real quick, and say, okay, what is epistemology? It's a subfield of philosophy concerned with knowledge. As you were saying before we went live, it's very interesting, right? How do we know things? What does it mean to know things? As we said before in some of the other classes, all philosophical questions and fields are related to each other. And you can see how epistemology would be related to every other subject, because as soon as you think you know something in a subject, how do you know? And what are the right rules for knowing? And what's the threshold for saying you know something? And these are all questions that philosophers debate. And when they're debating that specifically, they're in the subfield of epistemology. So we're going to deal with the problem of skepticism first. We're going to deal with rationalism versus empiricism, ways of getting to knowledge, foundations of knowledge. There's foundationalism and infantilism and reliability theories. And Quine has a really interesting theory about how our confidence in different propositions are related to each other. We're going to ask what counts as justification. We're going to try to define knowledge. These are the sorts of things we're doing in the course. We're going to talk about what epistemic closure is, and we're going to talk about the a priori, amongst other things. So these are the subsections of the course: skepticism, the structure of knowledge and justification, defining knowledge, epistemic closure. We're going to read some essays on theories of epistemic justification. Then we're going to get to something very interesting. I think Plantinga shows up here: virtue, epistemology, and the value of knowledge. We just did the religion class where we're reading an essay by Plantinga about, is it properly basic to believe in God? And you can tell that he is super into epistemology. He's using epistemological terms all over the place in that essay. We're going to look at naturalized epistemology, sort of an opposing trend, and the a priori. We're going to look at knowledge and context. And we're going to then talk about testimony, memory, and perception as things that might even have further challenges and difficulties with them. So skepticism. So before we go into the essays and all of that stuff, this is just the intro course to let us know what we'll be talking about in this class Mondays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We got a little bit of a late start today, but the first section we're going to be looking at is skepticism. And we've got a number of essays on the skeptical trap and how to avoid it. It's possible to question a lot. And in philosophy, it turns out you can question everything. You can question the evidence of your own eyes. You can question what's behind your own eyes. It's Descartes thought almost everything was dubitable. Nietzsche thought that more was dubitable than Descartes thought was dubitable. He even thought it was possible to doubt, I think, therefore I am. And so the problem for the skeptic is, how can I ever say I know anything? And if I want to know something, do I have to be really certain about it? Or if it's possible to doubt it, does that mean that I don't know it? If I come up with even an outlandish theme or theory for being able to doubt it, does that mean knowledge is ever elusive to me? So the essays we'll be reading are The Problem of the External World by Barry Stroud. We'll be reading 3 essays by G.E. Moore: The Proof of the External World, 4 Forms of Skepticism, and What is Certainty. We'll be reading How a Pyrrhonian Skeptic Might Respond to Academic Skepticism by Peter Klein, and Epistemological Realism by Michael Williams. It's going to give us a nice introduction to this question. In year 2, we've covered Meditating with Descartes, where he uses his skeptical method. We are reading Plato's dialogues, where we see the approach that Socrates has to always asking questions and always tearing down ideas of knowledge until we're left in a state of perplexity. So skepticism can be an attitude. It can also be a pit that you fall into. It can be something you try to solve. And we're going to look at that and how it relates to whether or not we can know anything. Then we're going to look at a section the structure of knowledge and justification, foundationalism, coherentism, which I think is related to some of Quine's ideas, or at least it's somewhat related, and infinitism, right? The idea that, okay, everything you believe, you have to be justified in believing, but that means you believe Q because of P, but you believe P because of R, and maybe that just goes back infinitely, or maybe it goes down to properly basic foundational principles that you don't have to argue to. Or maybe all of the things that you think you know are in a sort of a network where they're kind of on a web where they're tension pulling each other, and you could take one node out and replace it, but the entire structure is just sort of uh, it sort of exists together without a foundation. Um, when we do this section, we'll be reading essays by Chisholm and Sellers and Bonjour, who's we spend some time in year 3 looking at. Donald Davidson, who's extremely interesting, and I know that Tartaglia likes him. Hayek, Sosa, and Klein again. So that's what we'll be doing. Then we're going to try defining knowledge, and we're going to get to have a really, really one of the most fun essays in all of philosophy is the Getty's problems. I think it's really fun to read and think about. It's the part of epistemology that's maybe a little bit more fun. So for a long time in philosophy, justified true belief was a definition that many philosophers went along with for knowledge. If I believe something and that thing is true, and I have good reason to believe it, then I know it. That's knowledge. And there's this 2-page doctoral thesis written by a guy named Getty, who I think he was just writing it really quickly to finish his PhD program, that seems to a lot of philosophers to have completely exploded that entire theory of justified true belief. And it's a really fun essay to read. So we'll read it. And he gives counterexamples where you can be justified in believing something, that thing can be true, and you can believe it, and clearly you don't know the thing. So we won't go into it more now, I suppose, but it's really fun. Those are really fun essays, and they've led to a lot of other essays where people create their own types of Getty problems. We're only going to do a short class today to introduce everything, so we can pause for a moment and just give an example from his paper, which is a fun one to think about. Imagine you're applying for a job, you and one other individual, and you know the president of the company, and the president of the company says, listen, I'm sorry, buddy, but we're going to give the job to the other fellow. And while you're sitting in the room waiting for your interview, the gentleman who's also applying for the job takes all of the coins out of his pocket and puts them on a table, and you count them and you see that his pockets are empty and that there are 10 coins on the table, and he puts those 10 coins back in his pocket. You go to the bathroom, you run into the owner of the company. He says, I'm going to give the job to the other guy. I'm sorry. You say, well, that's a bummer, but okay, I'm glad to have the experience of another interview. You go to the bathroom and you think to yourself, I believe that the gentleman who will have the job, who will get the job, has 10 coins in his pocket. That's a statement that you are justified in believing because the president of the company said they're going to give the job to the other guy, and because you counted the objects in the other man's pocket. So you're justified in believing it. But while you're in the bathroom, a fax comes through, and the president learns that the other guy was fired for embezzling funds, and they're not going to hire him. They're going to hire you instead. And unbeknownst to you, you also happen to have 10 coins in your pocket. So you're justified in believing the statement, the gentleman who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. It's true that the gentleman who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket, and you believe it, that the gentleman who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. But obviously, that's an example of you don't really know even what you're talking about because you think it's the other guy who's going to get the job. So anyway, that's the challenge that was thrown into that very recently. And we're going to spend some time reading Getty's essay, and we're going to read some other individuals who respond to it and take it a little bit further. And that's one of the most fun parts of epistemology from my perspective, even if maybe it's overhyped and overrated to others. We're going to talk about the concept of epistemic closure. Does deduction work? Do we know all that is implied by what we know? Those are questions which will make a lot of sense to us as we read through these essays that are trying to deal with those questions. We're going to look at theories of epistemic justification. Ought you to believe things for which you are not justified? So the end of this section brings us nicely to the next section because we're using normative terminology now. Are you epistemically justified, or is it virtuous or ethical epistemically for you to believe something that you don't have good reason to believe. And that will bring us to virtue epistemology. The idea that you need to be the sort of person with the sort of faculties which are reliable and reliably utilize those faculties to get to truth and knowledge. So it takes the epistemological question and tries to deal with some of the difficulties of that question by sort of changing it into a conversation about a way of being or a characterological approach to knowledge, which I think is really interesting. Another way of dealing with that problem, though, or with the problems of epistemology, might be to do a naturalized epistemology. So what if we took epistemology and we just turned it into a subfield of psychology instead? So this might be an Aristotelian approach to sort of burying the problems of epistemology, whereas the first might have been a Platonic approach to doing it in a sense. I just mean with those two trends of thinking. And so we're going to look at that, and we've got Quine, and we've got Kim, and Anthony, and Putnam, and a lot of names that we're used to seeing in our other classes. And then we're going to do knowledge and content, and testimony, memory, and perception to see, okay, there's even further difficulties with justifying what I think I remember or what somebody tells me they remember, and even what I think I'm perceiving. So that's basically what we're going to be doing in the course, and these are the philosophers that we'll be reading, and that's really all I wanted to cover today in the intro to the epistemology course. Having said all that, I'm really happy that Dr. Tartaglia is here, because not as much demand has existed for this course as for some of the others. A lot of students are more interested in a philosophy of religion, philosophy of mind, but I wanted to do the epistemology course because, for one reason, I need to learn more about it. And Dr. Tartaglia and I have been debating some epistemological questions for about 8 years now. And I think having you here to challenge some of the stuff I say and to continue that conversation will be some of the most interesting parts of this course, I expect. So I spoke as quickly as I could, and we got through that pretty rapidly. How you doing? Good to see you.
Same here.
Nice haircut. I miss you. It was good seeing you up in New York. It's nice to be back online again, doing what we've been doing before. Oh, so I mentioned in the religion class before we started that Dr. Tartaglia is working on a few classes, and he's going to be in some of the ones that we're doing. We might co-teach one as well, but he's almost finished with the Gödel course. So if you're interested in learning maybe how to derive it, but if not quite how to derive it, at least understanding the mathematics and the context around Gödel's incompleteness theorems and what they mean and what they don't mean and where they are applicable and where they're not. This is a really awesome course. He's been trying to teach it to me for a while, and it's super interesting, and I can't wait to take it myself. That should be available soon. And then we've got a couple others in the pipeline. One that we talked about in the last video, where we're going to try to look at constitutional interpretation methods and landmark cases and the history of liberty in the United States and natural law theory. It's like 6 courses rolled into one, and we'll be sort of tag teaming that. And the other course is eventually coming, which is a 3rd-year alternative to the Nietzsche course that we'll be doing on Fridays, which is, if you don't care for Nietzsche, a course on Quine and the individuals who come after him. So all of that is in the future, some in the near future, some in the distant future. But yeah, that's probably all the announcements we need to make right now. I know there's some people watching who are not here with us, but to those of you who are not here, this is what we're up to. I should do this again just so that we can share what's going on here. So let's share this screen. Present, share. Okay, so these are the courses that are on offer now. Right now we're doing Mondays through Fridays, 5 and 8 Eastern Standard Time. We just did the philosophy of religion, and now this is the class 1 of epistemology. We did class 8 of philosophy of religion. We're going to be doing class 1 of ethics, class 1 of metaphysics. We're going to be doing class 15 or so of Peterson. We're going to be starting the year 2 backbone course. We're going to be continuing Plato, continuing the year 1 backbone course. We're going to be restarting Zarathustra and continuing philosophy of mind, where Savad will be there with us, and that'll be pretty cool. What else housekeeping is there to cover? We have 2 other professors who are coming to teach soon, one of which is going to be offering a course on science fiction and how to appreciate, it's a literature course on how to appreciate science fiction. And the other one is going to be teaching a course on how to appreciate romance literature. And we'll have more to say about those individuals and what's coming up with all of that soon.
What
So
was
that's
the second? How to appreciate what?
romance literature, stories
Romance.
of
Okay.
exactly. So the different types of romance and the structure of it, the themes and the tropes and all of that really good stuff. We'll tease it a little bit now, and we'll have more to say about both of those courses soon. So to everybody who's watching, I was expecting it to be a little bit of a short class today. We're just going to intro this course. Next week, we'll start with the skepticism essays, and we'll read them and we'll discuss them. And that's where we'll pick up with the epistemology class. So if we stop now, Dr. Tartaglia has some problems with my ideas of epistemology, and we could discuss that for a little while, if you'd like to. I'm a sloppy thinker who likes to use the word knowledge in contexts where I shouldn't. If I was a good Quinian, I wouldn't be going around using the word knowledge for things that are not propositional and more strictly defined. And that's sort of the nature of our ongoing conversation, I think. Yes? Doctor, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So would you like to take a stick and smack me in the head for being sloppy with the words belief, truth, and knowledge?
Well, what you tend to do, in my estimation, is you explain, you start your explanation of something, and you do it very well, and then slowly you start using the terms in a altered way, and you get carried away, and by the time you're towards the end, you're saying all sorts of what I consider outlandish things.
Fantastic.
I myself have a very simple view of epistemology, view of what can we know and how do we come upon knowing it. And I'm impatient with a lot of what of the papers that have come out on epistemology, trying to define truth. I don't find that helpful, and these puzzles, I don't find them helpful.
Okay. You mean the Gettier problems? Those are not
Yeah, I
interesting
don't.
to you.
What I find is someone comes up with a definition, and then a whole bunch of little papers are written on cases which disqualify that definition.
Mhm.
If justified belief is if knowing something is such and such, then what about this situation? And then the definition is modified, and it goes on and on. I don't think that's very helpful. And I'm thoroughly impatient with skepticism.
Okay, talk more about that. That'll be interesting because that's where we're going to start.
Well,
you're thoroughly impatient with skepticism.
Yeah. what's the skeptic's argument?
I can doubt something, therefore I don't know it. Something like that. If I can find a way to doubt it, how do
No,
I know it?
what's the better yet? What's the skeptic's argument against empiricism?
Well, one could be I don't know that there is a physical external world. All I have are the impressions in my mind. And so I could be dreaming. I've dreamt I was seeing a tree once. How do I know I'm seeing a tree right now and not just naked in my bed and there is no tree? That maybe they can't quite as easily be skeptical of the statement, I am having the experience of seeming to look at a tree, but they could question whether or not there really is a tree there to look at.
Well, in a way, they're right, but what difference does it make?
That's an interesting way out of the hole, swallow the whole thing and come out the other side and say, my experience is as if there is an external world, so I may as well just live in that world. Is that what you're saying? Like, what difference does it make if that were true?
Yeah.
That's an interesting way of dealing with it. Even if I'm in a dream, I have to behave according to the rules of the dream. So why am I worried if it's just a dream? That might be helpful to the matrix dwellers and the people who think we're in a simulation and all that stuff. It's like, well, you're still here, you're still a character, you're still having these experiences. Maybe it doesn't matter if your model of it as bits of hard stuff that exist outside of you really is true or not. That's the way it presents itself to you, so live that way. That's an interesting, we may have an essay by someone who argues something like that. Is that how you're impatient with the skeptics? Is that
Well, in
why
many
not
ways,
just get over it?
the skeptic's argument against empiricism, all knowledge comes from the senses.
Mm.
No knowledge without first being
Experience.
in the senses. Which, interestingly enough, was stated by St. Thomas.
Yes. Also Socrates.
Really?
Also Descartes. Yes, I mean, Plato's whole idea is that I can't know anything unless I've experienced it. Therefore, in the afterlife, I must have experienced the infinite. But it's an affirmation of the empiricist first principle. All knowledge comes through experience. And the same with Descartes. There's a weird marriage between empiricism and rationalism in both of them, where they take their empiricism principle to the point where they look at ideas inside their head and come to conclusions about the world. All of this before Kant, all before anybody used the phrase a priori synthetic or anything like that. So yeah, go ahead. I don't mean to interrupt, but yes, Aquinas had those ideas too.
Well, the main argument that the skeptics come up with is you can't trust the senses, and they give examples of hallucinations. And
they're faulty. I've had illusions. Sure, I've been wrong before.
And if you can't trust the senses, then you shouldn't be basing knowledge on the senses. But that's the only argument they give, which seems to be a real argument.
Okay. That seems like a legitimate argument to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you ask, how do they know that? How do they know
that they were wrong? They use their senses.
That impressions deceive sometimes. How do
They
they
have
know that?
they have to use other sensory data later
They
that
have they
contradicts.
it's science, which we can sum up as science. They use
Uh-huh.
they're using science to attack empiricism, which is kind of odd. Well, how do we know
Okay.
that our senses deceive us? Well, because
You use them more.
you place this, you insert a stick into a body of water, and it seems to bend. And our senses tell us it's bending. Science tells us it's not really bending, and so
The
they
light
can
is bending.
and so they conclude that our senses have deceived us. They're using science
Which is
to
empirical.
to criticize science.
Yeah.
Uh, 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 so if they're using science as part of their argument, we can use science in defending ourselves.
I see. Yeah.
And science gives us all sorts of information, and that's the information that we consider justified.
So
So
okay.
they're just cranks. Uh,
Now, if I can repeat back to your argument, see if I got it right. Essentially, the skeptic is saying we did insufficient amounts of science. If we did more, we would have realized we were wrong. Therefore, we shouldn't be caring about empirical information. And you think, well, that's a stupid argument. You thought you saw the stick bending, but if you did more empirical data collection, you would realize it wasn't. But that's not an argument against using your senses just because they were wrong at first and you had to use them more. The answer to bad data through the senses is more data through the senses. Is that about right?
well, that's a different argument, but I like it.
Oh, it's different. Okay. I thought that was, I was
It's
attempting
related.
to, okay. Okay. We should circle back to you saying I say a bunch of absurd, outlandish things. So
Only after you get wound up, and
after I get wound up, yeah, absolutely. So let's, I love that. Let's have this conversation a little bit more. So part of the problem for me is that I have this view of different realms of thinking. I'll call them realms for now, although that's a silly word. And it's the idea that the words truth and knowledge and belief take on different meanings when you're in these different realms. So, in the scientific realm, let's see if I can make this large enough for me to actually read it. Okay, make it a little larger still. Okay, so this is it's. I'm going to give a long justification for the nonsense I say and all of the crazy. I get all excited and I use these words in ways that you find tiresome or inappropriate. So for me, there are restrictions on what you're allowed to think and a change in the meaning of the uses of words like knowledge, belief, and truth when you're in different realms here. So I don't have to talk about all of this, but I can say in the inner realm, in the scientific, what we have is a vocabulary which is formulaic. It uses logic. It's experimental, right? I'm only going to regard as meaningful concepts which have measurable consequence. Um, it still has to follow logic. It's descriptive. You use peer review and you objectify everything. It's talking about it is the subject. And in it, you have physics and chemistry and biology and geology and sociology and economics, et cetera, et cetera. So in the scientific realm, the word knowledge might mean something like all of the data I've collected so far fits into this formula, and I have good expectations that if you give me new data, it will also fall into this formula. If you tell
uh,
me,
I don't like your use of the word formula there. Uh,
okay,
uh,
okay,
and again, I believe that that science is just sophisticated common sense,
Right.
or common sense is just and
Layman's science.
inchoate scientific reasoning. Um,
Absolutely.
there,
Yeah, you don't agree with these spheres of mind at all. Your view is that if you're thinking correctly, you're thinking scientifically, if I've got it correct. And basically, science is just common sense applied rigorously and carefully to, specific questions. And if a person hears a noise outside and they go and investigate, they're thinking scientifically,
yeah.
looking for the source of the noise. And that's so
But
I
I
don't.
don't like using the word scientific thinking because it's too easy uh, uh, to describe it or use it in a way where it means formulaic and measurable. Uh,
Yep.
I don't like that. So
So we disagree on the very approach from the beginning, because that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to say the scientific realm is the realm where you have all the rules of right reason and everything the philosophers are doing, but you add the empirical restriction of only regarding as meaningful sentences which have measurable consequence. And to me, science is very, very, very limited, but it's very powerful. You can do a lot because of the limitations, just like you can have beautiful and profound games of chess by following the restrictive rules of chess. By taking on these added restrictions, science can do things that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise: build an iPad, go to Mars, develop complicated, sophisticated structures for making sense of huge amounts of data. That's the way I think about it. It's not the way you think about it. You think about science as basically just another word for thinking correctly about stuff. I don't mean to be rude about it. I just mean that's the gist, right?
yeah, but you can flesh out thinking correctly about something. There's no doubt that science measures a lot. It tries to be more precise in its measuring. It uses microscopes and electronic microscopes and all very sophisticated instruments uh, and people, a lot of people kind of think that that's what science is all about. But all of that is incidental to science. What defines science is the use of the scientific method, the method of hypothesis, first formulated
Galileo.
precisely by Galileo.
Right.
Uh,
So,
you have a problem. There's something to explain. After all, uh, uh, knowledge. You, as Peirce said, if you don't have problems, if you don't have tasks, if you don't have things bothering you, and you're perfectly content, you don't give a damn about knowledge. You just enjoy life. When
sure.
when a problem comes up, and it's bothering you, and you want to get rid of the problem, you enter into a phase of what he calls inquiry. Inquiry, where you try to figure out what the problem is, what's actually going on, and how to solve it and get rid of the irritation. Uh, uh, and what that amounts is the scientific method. You have there's a problem. There's a problem. What's causing this? Causing? You have a problem. You have a terrible stomach ache. You say you want to know what's causing the problem. You of course, you you may think not you may think that not everything has a cause, but few people swallow that.
It's hard. It's hard. It's not clear that it's possible to think about anything without thinking about it in a causal nexus
Yeah,
and believing in determinism. That's the scientific approach, is to believe that
that's
things are sufficiently
that's
caused.
sort of common sense and scientific. If
For one half of the philosophical conversation, it's common sense. Yeah, it's to me, that's the Aristotelian impulse. I'm just using the terminology. I'm not
Okay,
saying it's Aristotle's idea.
that's okay, that's an impulse, but uh, it's not. Once science gets developed, of course, that's taken as a principle. Uh, 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 a physical event, every physical event has a physical cause. But in everyday thinking, among uh, primitive people, the usual thinking and the thinking that has survival benefits is that if you have a stomach ache, something caused it.
Sure, sure. And so you go to investigate what that cause is, and you're going to use your senses, and you're going to use logic, and you're going to try to confirm with others that you've
But
measured
not
things
only
properly.
but you don't just go out and look around. When the philosophers were first trying to define the scientific method, they emphasized close observation. You go out and observe. You observe and you observe some more, and which turned out to be a bunch of foolishness.
Oh yeah.
You don't just go out. You just don't go
Well,
out and
you
observe
impose a
everything in
structure.
your environment.
Sure.
Well,
You have to be oriented towards things that seem like they matter to you,
yeah.
and you're going to impose a structure on it, which is your beginning steps of hypothesizing, right?
Well, it's not so much things that are important to you, but because uh, uh, remember those Christian uh, explorers who crude archaeologists who were going to show that all the stories of the Bible were true, and they were going to look for uh, 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 the walls of Jericho and that sort of
Sure.
thing.
Sure.
They turned out to do very bad archaeology. They went out and when they were looking for evidence, uh, they 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 let
Very
their
selective.
religious beliefs
Yep.
tell them what to look for. And
Absolutely. They would look at a layer in the rock and go, "Oh, it's Noah's flood." And they
yeah,
would just point at it and be, "Okay,
yeah.
you have no
So
reason." Yeah.
just looking around and observing is uh,
Well,
that doesn't work.
their problem surely was that they already had their conclusion.
Yeah,
So it's not just so much that they just went around observing, it was that they brought the conclusion they already knew was correct to the
right.
observations.
That's a say. They're different. Those two things are different. They didn't just observe. They were led by.
The scientist has to let nature tell him or her what's true about nature.
Now,
I was okay. Go ahead.
the scientific method, which you can find as a method of common sense, also. What we call the scientific method, I like to call it the method of
The
reason,
right way of thinking, sure.
good thinking.
For
You
anyone
have
who's
something
listening,
to explain. You have a stomach ache. You want to know. You want to know what caused it, so that you can prevent stomach aches in the future, or
sure,
maybe figure out
alleviate
what
the
you have
pain
to
now.
do to get rid of this stomach ache.
Yep.
So you come up with a hypothesis. You come up with a hypothesis, and then you test the hypothesis. How do you test the hypothesis?
You say, if this is true, then X will be the result of this setup. And if it's
Right.
not true, then not X will be the
Yeah.
result. So you set up an
You
experiment.
set up a hypothesis and derive the logical consequences from that hypothesis, if true,
Mhm.
and logical consequences which are observable, and you uh, uh, if if you get if confirmation, if your predictions turn out to be true, if your prediction turns out to be false, you just throw out the hypothesis.
Done
That's
with it.
not it.
Yeah. Yeah.
If the prediction happens, it comes out true. If you predict correctly,
Keep testing.
you don't conclude that uh, that uh, uh, that
The
that your
hypothesis was
hypothesis
true.
is true. You say, well, it hasn't been proven false. There's some little confirmation for it. We'll put it aside. Then you come up with other hypotheses and other hypotheses. No, excuse me. You
You do more experiments.
you have
The
the
evidence.
same hypothesis, but you derive other conclusions from it, and you go on testing it, testing it, testing it. If with a lot of testing, you if with a lot of testing, your predictions always come out true, then you have good reason to accept that hypothesis.
You say the evidence is mounting, that we've tried to disprove it a
Yeah,
thousand ways and we failed.
you do everything. That's the irony in it.
A
You do everything to
falsification.
disprove it, and if you
Yep.
can't, you come up with a hypothesis, which is staggeringly difficult to come up in science, to come up with a good hypothesis,
Sure.
and then you try your best to disprove it. And if you can't, you provisionally accept the hypothesis as true, as the
Yep.
correct explanation.
It's a falsification theory. You can
Now,
falsify, you can't verify.
yeah. Now we can see that being done uh, um, uh, in everyday life. You have a stomach ache. You say, "Well, I wonder what caused that." You don't say, "Well, maybe what caused that is atmospheric pressure or the humidity in the air," uh, uh, or you might.
It could
But
be the candy I ate before bed.
yeah, you tried you use common sense. It's in the stomach. It's probably something that you ingested. Maybe it's something you ingested. So let's start
Okay.
there. So
Okay.
you say maybe it was the fried peppers I ate.
Sure.
So you wait a week to get better, and then you whip up the fried peppers again, and you
Mhm.
take about the same amount, and and you observe whether or not you feel bad. if you feel bad after the fried peppers, you have some reason to suspect them. Then
If you
you
don't feel bad, you say, well, then my theory is no good. I throw out that
right.
hypothesis. It
That's
wasn't
not
the
if you
peppers.
feel fine. Well, that didn't cause it. Well,
Yeah,
maybe it was those mushrooms I picked in the forest,
sure.
and that goes on until you get some
Fair
corroboration.
enough. Now, okay, okay.
And notice that this is science. This is good science, and it's got nothing to do with white lab coats, microscopes,
Sure.
fine measurement, none of that formulaic
Well, oh,
theories,
sure.
none of that.
That is okay. Granted, I will grant you that is a scientific way of thinking. That's good common sense. If it's a science, maybe it has formulas, but you're right. That's
And
thinking in a
also
scientific way. But you smuggled something in there.
besides the method of hypothesis, there's plain simple induction. If you get hit in the head with a 2x4 once and it hurts,
Uh-huh.
you get hit in the head a second time and it hurts. You get hit in the head a third time and it hurts. You come to the conclusion that getting hit in the head with a 2x4 hurts.
Sure. Philosophers need to get hit at least 3 times to come to that conclusion.
That's what I told my brother, who's
Yeah.
a physician, who every time I came up with something, he called it anecdotal. No,
Actu-
that's anecdotal evidence.
Oh, it's just
You
an
have
anecdote.
there's no double. He would say there's no double blind
Double blind peer review meta
right
analysis.
test for
Yeah.
doing that. So I came up with a 2x4 in the head example.
That's just an anecdote. Just anecdotally, I think getting hit in the head with a 2x4 hurts. Okay, there's a few things. All right. First of all, I agree with what you've said, but I want to point out that a couple things have been smuggled in. The first thing that's been smuggled in, I think, is a report of subjective qualia. It hurts. It hurts the character. I'm in pain. My stomach hurts. Getting hit in the head with a 2x4 hurts. None of that can be observed betwixt peers.
Wait a second. You're crossing over into the debate on testimony, the reliability of testimony. Now,
but before I do that, I'm not just doing that. I'm saying that the very subject, the very topic, I should say, of I am feeling pain is not something that you can point to that your peers can see evidence of. You can't measure that. It's just an individual personal character that endures that. Philosophers can discuss it, but scientists can't.
Yeah, I should not have used the pain example because
But it's a fine example. It illustrates that there are some things outside the realm of science to discuss.
The role of testimony.
That's as close as they can get. As close as they can get is when I ask a person on a scale of 1 to 10, they say 9 after they've been hit in the head with a 2x4. Therefore, I have evidence that they might be in pain, whatever that means. But the very definition of being in pain in a scientific field might be nothing more than how people report stuff. I imagine a doctor who's never felt pain before. He can still notice that his patients report that they're in disease and then look up what sort of pills would make them stop complaining about that. He can still be a doctor, but he has no access to being able to discuss the quality of what it feels like to suffer.
But you're saying he doesn't have to have that ability.
He wouldn't have to be a scientist, but I'm just trying to point out that science is a limited realm which can't discuss it. Philosophers can discuss it, artists can discuss it, There are realms where you can discuss what it's like to be in pain, but you can't really do that with anything that you could point to and measure that other people would be forced to agree with.
Well, again, keeping it on a simple level, the common man level. Do you agree that ordinarily, when a patient said he's got a pain in a certain place, he's telling the truth?
I could be a doctor and make that assumption, but I don't know what he means by I'm in pain.
Well, well,
That's outside my realm to consider. All I can say is he's complaining.
The doctor has some pain, right?
Maybe. He can't talk about it as a scientist, is my point. Because there's nothing to point to. It's just what it feels like to me. Maybe this doctor is one of the very few people who doesn't have the ability to experience pain.
He's not a doctor. He's not a doctor. He's the next door neighbor.
Okay.
And I say to him, I have a headache. Now, if he knows me well,
he can believe you.
And he knows the circumstances around me, he has reason to believe me.
Sure, absolutely. The conversation can go on that way. Absolutely. All I'm saying is it's not a scientific conversation if you're considering the suffering of the pain. Because to me, a scientific conversation has to be about something that we can point to and measure. And that's subjective. Scientific conversations are attempting to drag us towards objectivity, measurable, objective things.
Well, what about
there's no people there?
What about if I say on a scale of 1 to 10, how severe?
Sure.
Am I
Again,
measuring it?
There's no hindrance. My argument is not that there's a hindrance for the doctors or the scientists or the neighbors to have the conversation. They can have the conversation by saying the person is reporting a 9 out of 10 pain level. And that's something you can point to. You can say the person said 9 out of 10, and that's something you can discuss. So it doesn't stop the scientists from engaging in their doctoral helping and alleviating of pain and all of that. My point is that if the doctor also thinks to himself, my poor patient is suffering, and I'd like to alleviate that for them because their quality of life is worse because they're in pain, none of that is scientific talk. They might have access to thinking those thoughts, but they're living in the realm of philosophy or mythopoetry. They're living in the realm of narrative and literature. They're not living in the realm of being a scientist, because scientists can't talk about. This is why so many scientismists say things that are silly, like there's no evidence for free will. There's no evidence for consciousness. It's all an illusion. It's like, no, you're not allowed to consider it. Your language is so limited that it's not allowed to consider subjects. It's trying to objectify everything. But that doesn't mean that there are no such things as subjects. Your science didn't prove it doesn't exist. It's just not allowed to consider it. It has to regard statements like that as meaningless because they're not pointing to something measurable that you can force your peers to assent to. This is why I think that the rules of right reason extend beyond science, that it's not just a synonym for common sense, but that we need to think carefully outside the realm of stuff that we can point to and measure, which is my definition of science. We can quarrel about that, but my definition of science is just right thinking with an empirical requirement added to it.
What if we're talking about knowledge knowledge of the knowledge of knowledge of anything other than our own minds.
What if we're talking, so if we're talking, we can talk about anything which can be objectified is what can be talked about in science, but subjects can't be considered.
No, what do you mean objectified here?
You create a model in your mind of the thing as an object. The patient is an object who complains and reports a 9 out of 10. Not the patient is a character making their way from point A to point B through life, and right now they're suffering. That talk isn't scientific talk from my perspective.
Well, give me an example of a non-scientific statement.
Okay, great.
Wait. Which does not involve minds. Which does not.
A non-scientific statement which does not involve minds. Okay, good challenge. I'm going to try to make one that's not even tangentially related to minds at all, because I can think of a whole bunch, but you could say they're somewhat related to minds. Things like, well, okay. So let me try to think of one that is not related to minds. I can come up with a dozen examples, but they're all at least tangentially related to subjects, to minds.
Right.
So I could say something like, Hamlet is not courageous enough to do what needs to be done right away. Or I could say, the experience of seeing yellowness is pleasant sometimes. Or I could say, we must relate to the divine properly in order to live a fulfilling life. There's all sorts of statements that have to do with talking to us like we're characters moving from point A to point B, with obstacles in the way and trying to accomplish something. All of that language, I mean, it's all dealing with subjects, so there's minds involved in all those things. But those are the types of examples I would think of. I don't know if I can think of one that doesn't have to do with minds, because that's sort of where we think of the subject as being. I don't know if I can match your challenge. What does that prove? I mean, what does that mean? Like, what's the implications? I don't know if I can come up with an example that doesn't at least tangentially relate to minds. See, in the realm of the mythopoetic, I think we personify everything. So if I put this back up again, in my view, oh, come on. There we go. So in my view, in the mythopoetic, what we do is we personify things, and in the scientific, we objectify things. So when you read Ovid's Metamorphoses or the King James Version Genesis, what you get is the divine as a personality or a set of personalities. You get nature as personalities. You get the body politic as personalities, and you get yourself as a personality that has to relate to all of those things properly. And the vocabulary that you use is narrative, which is the proper vocabulary for characterological statements that could be true or false, right? I still want to use the word true, and I want to use the word knowledge, which is where our argument really reaches the tip of the spear here. But we're trying to relate properly to the personally conceptualized environment in which we dwell. That's sort of the language of the mythopoetic, in my view. So again, our disagreement is I want to limit the scientific to talk when we've modeled everything as objective, as objects, which we know is false because we know ourselves to be personalities. And that means that whatever is true of all of nature, as it selected things to fit in well with it, produced personalities. So the language which models the world as made up of personalities is directly it almost immediately follows from the observation that nature can produce personalities. I know myself to be a personality. I recognize you as a personality, and I think, well, whatever constitutes the universe, what fits in well with it is a personality that knows how to relate to other personalities. And none of that language, all of that language seems well outside of scientific conversation to me. But I think truth and knowledge and belief have to be applicable there with different qualifiers. They take on a slightly different tinge in those other realms. And we can pause there, but the other thing that seemed to be smuggled in your story was the character who's setting out to investigate what the source of his stomach ache is inclined not to just look in any direction. You said, well, he's not going to think it's the humidity. He's not going to think it's the pressure of the atmosphere. Or maybe he is going to assume it could be those things. But he's not going to think it's the 10 billionth molecule in the blade of grass outside that's causing his stomach ache, right? There's all sorts of directions he's not going to look. He starts out as a character trying to solve this problem to move from point A to point B in this limited small part of his story. And he starts with filters that say, probably it was something that I ate. And if he can rule out all of the things he ate as the source of it, then he might look for invisible tiny animals I can only see in a microscope that are the source of my stomach ache. Or maybe he'll look for other causes, but he's starting inclined in a certain direction with a kind of wisdom and characterological orientation, which is not something he discovered in his microscope or his telescope. Nature didn't tell him to do that. He's just the sort of character who moves in that direction.
Well, I think that's true, but that's another question,
Okay.
And it has to do with how our minds work.
Okay.
You see, the so-called scientific knowledge, or common sense knowledge, as I call it, has the virtue that it can be checked by others.
Yes, absolutely. That's why it has to be restricted to objective things. I have to be able to measure it, tell you how I measured it. You have to repeat how I measured it. You can measure the same thing. Then we can agree.
We can agree qualitatively too. We don't have to measure everything.
That's part of what makes science so powerful, is what you just said. Is the fact that we can both verify the measurement.
What gives it its claim to being in the realm of science, being something superior, is that it can be checked. It's intersubjective.
It's very important. Absolutely.
But it's in the nature of self-knowledge, knowledge of our own minds, that it's not checkable by others, and therefore less reliable.
I don't disagree. There's powerful things that science can do that other fields can't do. Like that language, because of its restrictions, allow us to do a lot more. It's almost like a pillar standing up on a large platform of foundational ground. There are places it can't go. It's restricted to being here, but it can grow very tall as a result. There's benefits to thinking scientifically, and there are downsides to thinking scientifically. There's restrictions. Um,
Oh,
I totally agree. But there's plenty of things it can't consider, and plenty of those things are some of the most important things that matter to us. Right? Why is it like something to feel pain? I wish to alleviate my suffering. Those are not questions science can do much with, but it can help you to alleviate your suffering if it just regards it as getting you to stop complaining. Um, but why it's like anything to see red, or what it's like to be in love, or how do I relate properly to the divine or to nature, all of those types of, or even ethical questions, right? Philosophical, ethical questions of how should we then live. Those are not really, science can inform and it can give us more data about relevant, uh, tangentially related details and facts, but it can't answer those questions for us. It's limited. It can't. It's not allowed to go there.
well, I'm the first to concede that science isn't ethics, isn't morality.
But ethics matters. There's a vocabulary for
Sure,
discussing ethics outside
I've
science.
always said ethics matters.
Sure.
Uh, uh,
My only point is we have to go outside the vocabulary of science to have that discussion. We agree it matters, but it's not just common sense. Science is more restricted than just good thinking. Because we can have good thinking about ethical questions, but we're not doing science.
well, but weren't we talking about knowledge about the world?
Yes. Well, I was going to say that the word knowledge has a different definition for me, whether you're inside or outside of these different realms. So I was going to say that knowledge inside the scientific realm is something like all of the data fits my formula, or my hypothesis has not been disproven, though we've tried a lot, and so we have a strong expectation that if you give me new data, it will also fit the same formula, and I can make predictions. But knowledge outside of that in philosophy is something more like, um, there are good arguments put forward for assenting to this proposition, and no one has shown me that it's self-contradictory or leads to an absurdity, and it seems to match, it satisfies the requirements that those of us in the ethical or whatever conversation have and are bringing to the conversation. And then knowledge outside that in the mythopoetic is something more like Adam knew his wife, or when the Bible says to know me is salvation. It's more of a personal relationship of knowing someone, that type of knowledge, uh, where knowledge of self and knowledge of the other is simultaneously the same thing. If I learn something about you, I learn something about myself, whether we're the same or different, it doesn't matter. I get simultaneous knowledge that way, and I'm coming to know you as a person, or to know the divine, or to know the Greek divine characters that constitute nature and things like that. Um, Quinians, persons like yourself, really hate the idea that someone would use the word knowledge outside of propositional, um, language, first of all. But if you're going to equate science to just right thinking, then scientific language, whatever you'd want to define that as.
Well, do you think that for something to be called knowledge, there must be an arbiter for solving disagreements?
Uh, that's a good question. In science, we have an arbiter.
Yeah.
The arbiter in the mythopoetic is something more like the consequences of how I lived my life. We don't actually get to settle it right away. If I think I know how to be oriented towards nature and the divine properly, and I fail and my life is a disaster, that's the arbiter that proves I wasn't telling a good enough story about who I am and what the
The
world is
trouble
made of.
is, what's a failed life to one person is a fully.
Sure. There's a lot of trouble. Look, we're not in a solid realm when we're outside science, right? So I recognize this and I want to concede this, right? Inside science, we have these solid definitions. Outside that, it's more like, would you like to have the same type of end as Hamlet had? Well, it's a tragic end, and you might want that, or you might not want that. So read the story and be more like Horatio or more like Hamlet, depending on what your subconscious demons are aimed towards. I mean, it's there's much more things are open out there. It's not the part of the problem is that in the realm of the restrictions of where science applies, we can be very, very sure and we can build very strongly. But outside, it's more like we're swimming in an ocean. When we're outside the philosophical, especially, we're in a chaotic realm out there. And so it's worse. I'll agree with you. It's worse in some ways to have to navigate that world, but we do have to navigate it, right? You've lived an amazing life, but part of that life was getting married. You kind of can't know whether or not that's a good idea or not. You just have to do it. You know what I mean? And so you don't get the solid answer exactly. You just get stories that inspire you towards aiming to highest good, and hopefully you can navigate your way from point A to point B. But the arbiter is whether or not you can be the arbiter in your own case and say I'm pleased with my life or I'm not. Other people can say I wish to be like that person or I don't. They can admire you or not. So but it's all individual. Every individual person is making their own judgments. So I'm agreeing that it's worse, but I'm saying this is the world we're in. It's necessary. We have to be able to deal in those realms, even if it isn't as solid. This is where I go off into a bunch of stuff you have problems with. As you said at the beginning, right?
It seems to me that knowledge that can be checked, knowledge
Mhm.
knowledge that allows for an arbiter
Mhm.
is something qualitatively different from other kinds of knowledge.
I agree. Now, maybe we should just use the word knowledge for that and not use it in those other realms. Is that what you're arguing for? Is say like that would count as knowledge, but That other stuff doesn't really meet the threshold.
I think that would be a good idea.
Yeah, we're just dealing with definitions. I can understand that, right? It's definitely a different quality of knowledge. So I would agree with you. And I would say we could call it knowledge sub one, knowledge sub two, and knowledge sub three. We could just give it different words. But I can see that the qualitative difference of knowledge that we could check between two different people is of a better quality. I can agree with that. It poses no problems for my model. Um, we're just deciding whether or not we should use the word knowledge outside of that. And
Okay, we've solved the problem of epistemology. What's the next problem?
okay, so we'll start again next week at the same time, and we're going to start with the skepticism problem. We're going to read through all these essays, and we're going to have a good time. And like I said, I think the most interesting part of this class is going to be your and I continuing debate we've been having for
Yeah,
many
I
years on these
enjoyed it
topics.
tonight, even though I'm sweating here, even
It's a
with
bit
the
hot
air
here too.
conditioner on.
Same. I got the AC on. It's a bit hot.
I had to put the air conditioner unit in the window. It took me an hour. I got all sweaty. I was feeling worse than had I not started.
It's where.
But I'm enjoying
Okay.
it now.
We'll end the live stream. We'll go into the after conversation, and everybody who's seen these videos and the video we did before can look at the schedule. We're going to be doing things 5 p.m. and 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday through Friday.
My
in
last
different
thought
classes.
is
Please.
if so few people are interested in epistemology, can you imagine how many people would be interested in Gödel?
Well, I think there's going to be some people very interested in Gödel. I think what we've got to do is start slowly building how we find people on the internet, because this course of yours is amazing and it's very interesting. I'm interested in it. You can teach it just to me. But I think as we put the videos out in different forums where people are already discussing this stuff, we're going to find some students that way. I understand what your concern is, but we've got to build the curriculum. We've got to make the videos. So we're going to do that. All right, I'm going to end the live stream. We'll go into the after conversation. Thank you to everybody out there who's watching, who's not in the video. I see you. You know what we'll do as before we leave? Oh, before we leave, we will have a ceremony. Get your cup, your mug, your glass, your tankard, your chalice, your thermos, your stein, your canteen jug or flask, your vessel of any kind, and fill it with your favorite liquid. I like coffee, and right now we're going to have a little Dr. Pepper. And join me now for the unparalleled pleasure, the dopamine hit of the day, the thing that makes everything, literally everything better. It's called the simultaneous sip, and it happens now. Go. Oh, God, that's some good stuff. Ooh, chills. I get chills. All right, let's see you all next time.